Hello, my name is Sherrie Tucker, and I'm a professor of American Studies at University of Kansas. I've had the good fortune of being at KU for 19 jazz vespers, and I've particularly enjoyed performances of the Strayhorn Ellington Tchaikovsky Nutcracker Suite. So it's an honor for me to share some background information on the history of this fascinating piece. For me, this is a story of creative collaboration, an undervalued quality in stories of artistic production. In fact, an undervalued quality in many of our stories, but one that requires just as much, if not more, creative genius, artistry, and expertise as soul composition. In 1938, a 28-year-old aspiring concert pianist and composer, seeking a career in a world that did not welcome Black composers and concert pianists, sent a piece that he wrote to a world famous orchestra leader and composer. Duke Ellington was so impressed that he recorded the piece with the composer Billy Strayhorn at the piano. Very soon after that, Ellington brought Strayhorn into his organization, and the two began a creative collaboration that is not well captured by the division of labor of composer arranger. Their collaboration lasted 28 years, ending only with the younger composer's death in 1967. Strayhorn and Ellington scholars Lisa Barg, Walter Vandeleur, and David Haydu have been helping us to understand Strayhorn's contributions, not to diminish Ellington, but to learn more about their creative collaboration. The piece that we are about to hear, an adaptation of Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite, was a Strayhorn Ellington collaboration of the spring and summer of 1960. And I've got a little bit of an interesting tidbit of history of technology here. This piece, or the recomposition of Tchaikovsky's piece, was composed not for performance and then recorded later, but actually composed for the long playing record. This was the LP or album boom when projects were being conceptualized specifically to take advantage of this brand new format, the long playing or LP format. For those unfamiliar with this format, an LP in 1960 was a disc with room for about 22 minutes of music on each side. That might sound restrictive today, but it offered freedom from previous formats. It was a time of concept albums, movie soundtracks, whole concerts, and musicals. So, one thing that changed with this recomposition of the Nutcracker was that a three-act ballet became a two-act LP. The cleverly placed entr'acte at the end of side one was a cue that, oh, it's just about time to get up and go over and physically turn over the LP, which one had to do in those days. Ellington had made many records prior to 1960, of course, but the Ellington album boom can be dated to his 1956 contract with Columbia Records, which called for a relentless schedule of LPs. The publicity strategy at Columbia and in the Ellington organization was to expand his audience beyond the jazz faithful. And indeed, in this time period, Ellington became a household name. He was on the cover of Time magazine in 1956. In the civil rights era, it had become possible to market an African American man as a genius, as sophisticated, as a composer of renown. This in itself was recognition well earned and an important leap in how Black genius and dignity could be represented in the mainstream. The problem was Ellington wasn't the only genius composer in the Ellington organization. Ellington knew it, the orchestra members knew it, even Columbia Records knew it. So, with the release of The Nutcracker in 1960, the original album cover was designed to tell a different story. The original cover has a white background with colorful drawings of the characters from Tchaikovsky's ballet around the perimeter, encircling a photograph of two African American men wearing white polo sweaters. Duke Ellington is on the left, looking into the camera, and Billy Strayhorn is on the right, slightly behind Ellington and gazing downward. The great photographer Gordon Parks had been brought in to take that photograph for the cover, as Irving Townsend of Columbia Records wanted to do something to recognize Strayhorn and the significance of the collaboration of the two composers. This was not the first time that shared credit was warranted, but it was, as Strayhorn scholar Lisa Barg writes, quote, the first time in the history of their partnership that Strayhorn was given prominent visibility and authorial credit in an artistic collaboration that had been ongoing since 1939. In the case of Nutcracker, it was Strayhorn who pitched the idea to Columbia Records, and thanks to the research of Ellington Strayhorn scholar Walter Vandeleur, we know now that Strayhorn not only did all the arrangements, but he was the principal creative agent in the adaptations of at least 6 of the 9 movements of Tchaikovsky's ballet. These are movements 1, 2, 4, 5, 8, and 9. On side 1, Overture, Toot, Toot, Tooty Toot, Sugar Rum Cherry, and Entr'acte. And on side 2, Dance of the Floriadors and Arabesque Cookie. The collaboration between Ellington and Strayhorn in this period occurred largely by coast-to-coast telephone through discussion of how to recompose with Tchaikovsky, whose music they both loved, but also about Russian literature, history, and dance. They inspired one another through dialogue, which was part of their co-composition. Indeed, the album cover tells the story of 3 composers, 2 living and 1 deceased, and this is in fact how Ellington and Strayhorn told the story of working on this particular project. Strayhorn spoke of the great care that needed to be taken when one of the collaborators literally cannot weigh in on the decisions. It was not a reasonable goal to write in such a way as to prevent Tchaikovsky from rolling over in his grave, but perhaps they could reduce the number of times he rolled. For Strayhorn, the challenge was to, and I'm going to quote Strayhorn here, to adapt Tchaikovsky's ballet with our flavor without distorting him. Despite this visible effort to tell a story of collaboration, subsequent publicity celebrated this album, like other Ellington Strayhorn projects, as Ellington's alone. The story of collaboration just wouldn't stick due to the stubborn perception that composers are geniuses who act alone. It had been difficult enough to get Ellington recognized as a genius as a composer. How could a legible marketing story be created that recognized 2 Black geniuses at once in a world that could barely handle one? Add to this Strayhorn's decision, and I'm quoting Lisa Barg again, to live as an openly gay Black musician during an intensely homophobic era that hinged upon the twin conditions of his public invisibility and the personal, artistic, and financial support and safe haven that his partnership with Ellington provided. This is not to say, however, that the need for public invisibility justified withholding credit for his work, and this was a constant tension within the collaboration. Ellington's 1956 contract with Columbia Records, in fact, stipulated more artistic freedom for Strayhorn and more prominent credit for his work. We see this promise briefly fulfilled in the album cover for Nutcracker Suite, and we hear the artistic freedom in the music. As Vandeleur puts it, Strayhorn maintains a firm balance between wit, irony, and tribute, caricaturing neither his own nor Tchaikovsky's music. This is not a cheesy jazzing the classics novelty piece, but a serious recomposition among Strayhorn, Ellington, and as they saw it, Tchaikovsky. That is not to say that this piece is lacking in whimsy, but we must remember that the source material, after all, is a ballet written for a nutcracker. In the spirit of creative collaboration, I cannot wait to hear the 2020 offering of the KU Jazz Vespers.